They rarely attack you openly. They don't shout. They don't threaten you, and they definitely don't introduce themselves as your enemy. Instead, they arrive quietly, with a smile, with curiosity, with just enough kindness to make you trust them. At first, everything feels normal, but slowly, something begins to change. You leave conversations feeling strangely drained. You replay their words again and again in your mind. You start questioning things you were once confident about, and eventually you realize something unsettling. They didn't hurt you with force. They hurt you with access. Not access to your house, not access to your money, access to your mind. And once someone has access to your inner world, they no longer need to control your life, because you will start controlling yourself for them. This is how toxic people win, not through violence, but through emotional influence, the real weapon of toxic people. Most people imagine toxic people as loud, aggressive, and easy to recognize. They expect cruelty to come with raised voices, obvious insults, or open hostility. But the most dangerous people rarely behave this way at first. Their power comes from subtle influence, not open attack. A toxic person's real weapon is not anger, it is emotional positioning. They begin by placing themselves close to your inner world. They listen carefully. They show interest in your thoughts, your struggles, your dreams. At first, this attention feels comforting. It feels like someone finally understands you. But what they are actually doing is mapping your emotional landscape. They learn what excites you. They learn what worries you. They learn what makes you doubt yourself. And once they understand these things, they begin to shape your emotional reactions without you noticing. You may start changing your behavior around them. You soften your opinions so they won't feel challenged. You hold back your excitement because they seem uncomfortable with your success. You begin measuring your words more carefully, trying to avoid triggering their mood. Slowly, almost invisibly, your emotional world begins orbiting around their reactions. This is how influence becomes control, not through force, but through adjustment. You adjust your tone, your energy, your confidence. You begin managing their emotions as if they are your responsibility. And the more you do this, the more power they gain. Many people fall into this pattern because they were taught something that sounds noble, but can be dangerous when applied without boundaries. They were taught that kindness means always being understanding. They were taught that good relationships require emotional openness at all times. But openness without protection invites exploitation. Imagine a city that leaves its gates wide open, trusting that everyone who enters will behave respectfully. That city may begin with peace, but eventually someone will take advantage of the lack of defense. Your emotional world works the same way. Without boundaries, someone would eventually step inside and begin rearranging the space for their own comfort. And by the time you realize what has happened, you may already feel smaller, quieter, and more uncertain than you once were. That is the silent power toxic people rely on. Why your emotions become their power. Every toxic relationship depends on one critical factor: your emotional accessibility. The more transparent your inner world, the more influence someone can wield over you. Toxic people aren't looking for a fight, they're looking for entry. They want proximity to your feelings so that your reactions become their leverage. Think about it. Why does a single offhand comment from the wrong person echo in your mind for hours, while 100 compliments from people who truly care barely register? The answer is leverage. Toxic people sense it instinctively. They observe what unsettles you, what sparks self-doubt, and what triggers guilt. Then they store this information, waiting for the right moment to use it. They collect data on your vulnerabilities like a strategist preparing for battle. Every hesitation, every moment of insecurity, every word you speak in uncertainty is catalogued. Later, it may resurface disguised as humor, concern, or advice, but it is always designed to destabilize you. They are not being cruel by accident. They are being strategic. Emotional manipulation is rarely loud. It's precise. It thrives on subtlety and consistency. And here's the trap most people fall into. They believe emotional openness is inherently good. They think revealing their struggles, doubts, or fears will foster understanding and connection. With toxic people, this is the opposite of true. Vulnerability becomes a roadmap of pressure points. Every confession, every admitted insecurity is a lever waiting to be pulled. The mentally untouchable person approaches relationships differently. They understand that kindness does not require transparency. They speak without oversharing, listen without absorbing, and remain present without becoming exposed. Emotional information is power, and power is not given away freely. Starving a toxic person of your emotional reactions is essential. Your attention, your validation, your anger, and your guilt are all forms of currency in a toxic economy. When they cannot access these currencies, their influence begins to erode. They may escalate, they may attempt pity, or they may provoke in new ways, but they cannot succeed if you refuse to hand them the keys to your inner world. At this stage, emotional discipline is more than self-control. It's a strategic defense. You are not suppressing feelings. You are fortifying your mind, observing without internalizing, and refusing to allow another person to turn your emotions into their playground. The first rule of mental invincibility. If you want to become mentally untouchable, the first and most crucial rule is this: stop giving everyone unrestricted access to your inner world. Your thoughts, fears, doubts, and emotional fluctuations are assets, not open-source data for anyone to analyze. Many people fall into the trap of oversharing because they believe honesty equals trustworthiness. They think that explaining themselves, revealing their insecurities, or confessing vulnerabilities will create understanding. With toxic people, this is a fatal miscalculation. Every personal detail you reveal becomes a potential lever. Every confession you offer becomes a doorway through which they can later destabilize you. They are not lacking information, they are lacking conscience. Your vulnerability is not a bridge to empathy, it is a blueprint for manipulation. Being mentally untouchable is not about becoming cold, it is about being strategically opaque. It is about speaking without revealing, answering without exposing, being present without surrendering. There is a crucial distinction here. Deception hides truth. Selectivity protects truth. You are not lying. You are deciding who deserves access to the most sensitive parts of your mind. Notice how toxic people probe. They ask questions that seem harmless, even caring. They lean in when you mention a weakness or when you show uncertainty. They remember those moments. Later, they may reference them in jokes, helpful advice, or disguised reminders of your past mistakes. This is not casual memory, it is data collection. The mentally untouchable person starves these tactics by maintaining emotional neutrality. They respond calmly, briefly, and without emotional spikes. Short answers, neutral tone, calm eyes. No visible wound, no rush to justify or explain. Over time, the manipulator becomes bored. Predators lose interest when the prey does not bleed. This is the first step toward reclaiming sovereignty over your mind. Once you recognize that your emotional reactions are not mandatory offerings, you gain control. You begin to see that the world does not need your consent to exist, but you decide who gets to inhabit your inner landscape. Remember, mental invincibility begins with protecting your mind. It begins with choosing selectivity over exposure and understanding that transparency is a privilege, not a requirement for every relationship. Starving the manipulator. Toxic people survive on reactions, not confrontation, not reasoning, not compromise. They survive on emotional fuel. Your anger, your guilt, your defensiveness, your need to explain, your attempts to justify yourself, all of these are their currency. Every emotional spike you offer feeds the machine. Every reaction reinforces their sense of control. The moment you realize this, you unlock a fundamental truth. You cannot argue someone out of manipulation. You cannot educate a person who lacks conscience. You cannot reason with someone whose strategy is built on destabilizing you. The only way to reclaim power is to refuse to supply what they feed on. This is why emotional non-reactivity is so potent. Short answers, neutral tone, calm eyes, no visible wound, no internal tremor, no mental replay. When a toxic person cannot provoke you, they cannot gain leverage. And leverage is their lifeblood. Starve them of it, and they weaken. Observe how predators respond. They escalate when ignored, push harder when met with silence, or attempt guilt when patience meets their gaze. This is the ultimate test. If you remain centered, they grow frustrated. They lose the familiar rhythm of control. The game that once required your constant reactions begins to collapse because you no longer play. Starving a manipulator is not cruelty, it is discipline. It is refusing to hand over control of your internal state. And discipline is a skill, not a feeling. It requires practice. At first, it will feel unnatural. You may think you are being cold, distant, or uncaring, but in reality, you are simply reclaiming the territory of your mind. This is also why emotional detachment is strategic, not passive. Silence, calm, and neutrality do not signify weakness. They signal that your inner world is inaccessible. When a toxic person cannot manipulate you, they cannot predict you. They cannot destabilize you. And without that destabilization, their influence evaporates. The power of starving a manipulator lies in consistency. They will probe, push, and test boundaries again and again. But each time you maintain your neutrality, you strengthen the walls around your inner kingdom. You are no longer prey. You are no longer reactive. You are mentally untouchable. Starving the manipulator. Toxic people survive on reactions, not confrontation, not reasoning, not compromise. They survive on emotional fuel. Your anger, your guilt, your defensiveness, your need to explain, your attempts to justify yourself, all of these are their currency. Every emotional spike you offer feeds the machine. Every reaction reinforces their sense of control. The moment you realize this, you unlock a fundamental truth. You cannot argue someone out of manipulation. You cannot educate a person who lacks conscience. You cannot reason with someone whose strategy is built on destabilizing you. The only way to reclaim power is to refuse to supply what they feed on. This is why emotional non-reactivity is so potent. Short answers, neutral tone, calm eyes, no visible wound, no internal tremor, no mental replay. When a toxic person cannot provoke you, they cannot gain leverage. And leverage is their lifeblood. Starve them of it, and they weaken. Observe how predators respond. They escalate when ignored, push harder when met with silence, or attempt guilt when patience meets their gaze. This is the ultimate test. If you remain centered, they grow frustrated. They lose the familiar rhythm of control. The game that once required your constant reactions begins to collapse because you no longer play. Starving a manipulator is not cruelty, it is discipline. It is refusing to hand over control of your internal state. And discipline is a skill, not a feeling. It requires practice. At first, it will feel unnatural. You may think you are being cold, distant, or uncaring. But in reality, you are simply reclaiming the territory of your mind. This is also why emotional detachment is strategic, not passive. Silence, calm, and neutrality do not signify weakness. They signal that your inner world is inaccessible. When a toxic person cannot manipulate you, they cannot predict you, they cannot destabilize you. And without that destabilization, their influence evaporates. The power of starving a manipulator lies in consistency. They will probe, push, and test boundaries again and again. But each time you maintain your neutrality, you strengthen the walls around your inner kingdom. You are no longer prey. You are no longer reactive. You are mentally untouchable. Compassion without self-betrayal. Many people mistake empathy for surrender. They believe that caring means opening every door, absorbing every struggle, and offering endless emotional refuge. With toxic people, this is a trap. Compassion without boundaries becomes self-betrayal. The more you give without discretion, the more access they gain to manipulate, destabilize, and drain you. Being mentally untouchable does not mean you stop feeling. You can acknowledge someone's pain without letting it occupy your mind. You can recognize their struggles without volunteering yourself as a constant solution. You can offer kindness without sacrificing your emotional sovereignty. This is a subtle but powerful shift. Think of it as a river. Water flows, nourishes and refreshes, but it also obeys its banks. It does not flood everything in its path indiscriminately. Your empathy is the river. Boundaries are the banks. Without them, your energy spills everywhere, leaving you exhausted and vulnerable. With them, it flows purposefully, sustaining without surrendering control. Toxic individuals often rely on your desire to help. They know that your identity may be tied to being the one who listens, the anchor, the rescuer, and they exploit it. Every emergency you respond to, every crisis you absorb, reinforces a dynamic where your value is tied to your availability. It is a hidden form of leverage. The mentally untouchable person learns to offer empathy without offering access. They can feel for someone without carrying their chaos. They can wish them well without inviting them close enough to poison their inner world. They can observe suffering and acknowledge it without internalizing it. This is not cruelty, it is strategic preservation. You may feel uneasy at first. You may wonder if you are being selfish, heartless, or unkind. But what you are actually doing is reclaiming your life force. You are choosing conservation over sacrifice, clarity over chaos. You are learning that proximity to someone else's turbulence does not make you noble, it makes you available for exploitation. The paradox is striking. The more selectively compassionate you become, the stronger your presence grows. Your attention gains weight, your words carry clarity, your silence resonates. People sense that you are no longer a playground for emotional extraction. Those who respect boundaries rise to meet your standards. Those who rely on manipulation fade away. This is the essence of compassion without self-betrayal, feeling deeply, caring sincerely, and yet never surrendering your inner sovereignty. Your empathy becomes intentional, not indiscriminate. Your energy becomes yours, no longer borrowed, loaned, or hijacked by another's chaos. The trap of validation. Toxic people rarely attack directly. Instead, they control subtly, and one of their most effective weapons is validation manipulation. They make their approval feel essential and their disapproval unbearable. They praise inconsistently, criticize with subtle venom, and withhold acknowledgement strategically. Over time, your sense of self can begin to depend on this emotional ledger. The moment your self-worth relies on someone else's recognition, you've surrendered a critical part of your sovereignty. You start monitoring your own behavior for signs of approval. You adjust your tone, your energy, your choices, just to keep them content. Every smile, every word, every gesture becomes a negotiation, a calculated move to earn their validation, and with each attempt, they tighten their grip without raising a hand. The mentally untouchable person relocates their sense of worth inward. Approval becomes optional, not necessary. Praise becomes a bonus, not a lifeline. Disapproval becomes background noise, not a verdict. When your self-esteem no longer lives in someone else's hands, toxic people lose their most potent tool, you as a source of emotional currency. This does not mean you stop caring about relationships. It does not mean you reject all feedback or refuse to collaborate. It means you recognize that the emotional weight of their approval is not yours to carry. You interact from a position of internal independence, observing behavior without needing it to define your value. Validation dependence is subtle, but it shapes almost every interaction. You may find yourself explaining too much, justifying your choices, or overcompensating for perceived mistakes. This is a response to the unseen pressure of approval seeking. The moment you withdraw that dependence, these patterns lose their power. You no longer negotiate your inner state for external acceptance. The power of mental untouchability is quiet, but unmistakable. Once you are free from the trap of seeking validation from those who profit from withholding it, toxic people sense it immediately. They may attempt new tactics, provocation, guilt, even charm, but their influence over you has already collapsed. Internal validation is a fortress. Every thought, every decision, every reaction that originates from within becomes a shield, not a liability. And from this foundation, you interact with the world with clarity, focus, and strategic presence. Approval is optional, but sovereignty is mandatory. The power of strategic distance. One of the hardest lessons in life is accepting that not everyone deserves the same access to you. Some people belong close to your heart, others belong at a distance, and some belong outside your life entirely. But when you begin creating emotional distance, toxic people react strongly. They may call you cold, they may say you've changed, they may accuse you of being selfish, but understand this clearly: when someone loses control over you, they often try to control how others see you. Do not confuse their discomfort with your mistake. Their discomfort simply means the dynamic is no longer working for them. The hidden addiction to toxic roles. There is another uncomfortable truth. Sometimes toxic relationships survive because of your identity. You might feel important when you help someone constantly. You might feel needed when you solve their problems. You might feel valuable when you become their emotional support. But being needed is not the same as being respected, and being relied upon is not the same as being valued. When you step away from toxic dynamics, life may suddenly feel quieter, less dramatic, less chaotic. At first, this silence can feel empty, but that emptiness is actually freedom. It is your mind finally returning to you. The ultimate form of mental power. Becoming mentally untouchable does not mean you stop feeling. It means your emotions are no longer easily hijacked. You still experience anger, but anger becomes information, not explosion. You still feel sadness, but sadness no longer traps you. You still love people, but you choose carefully who gets close enough to see that love. Eventually, something interesting happens. Toxic people stop targeting you, not because you defeated them, but because you stopped being useful to them. No reactions, no drama, no emotional fuel, and manipulators quickly lose interest in environments where they cannot feed. Your inner world is a territory, and every territory must have gates. Not walls that isolate you from everyone, but gates that allow you to decide who enters. Once you experience the calm that comes from protecting your mind, you will never again confuse emotional openness with emotional exposure. Because real strength is not measured by how much toxicity you can endure. Real strength is measured by how little access you give it. And the moment you master that, you become something extremely difficult to control. A person whose mind belongs only to themselves.